Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome. This is Roger Stone. Welcome to the very special July 4th weekend edition of The Roger Stone Show, right here at 77 WABC, the most dynamic, influential, and powerful AM station in all of America. Have you ever been doxxed? Doxing is when someone takes your private information, like your Social Security number or your cell phone number or your home address, and posts it on the internet. This past Tuesday, a woman who's on X, formerly known as Twitter, who calls herself, I guess it's Malay, M-A-I-L-E, Malay PR, posted a page from the sealed indictment against me in the Mueller witch hunt. You remember that case. That's the one in which I was convicted on all counts and then exonerated when a federal judge ordered Robert Mueller to disgorge his long-rejected hidden final report, in which even Mueller couldn't sugarcoat the fact that he had found no evidence of Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or any other illegal activity, for that matter. It became very clear then that I had simply been charged, impoverished, and pressured so that I would testify falsely against President Donald Trump, which of course I refused to do. The president would later commute my sentence and give me a full and unconditional pardon because, well, I did nothing wrong. In any event, Malay posted my cell phone number, also what was Donald Trump's apartment number in New York, what was then Donald Trump's cell phone number, and what was then Donald Trump's office number, all of them coming from the sealed indictment, which is not supposed to be public. Now, Malay posted this information, which is not only against the rules of X, formerly known as Twitter, but also illegal, at approximately 11 o'clock at night. At 11:30, I got the first cell phone call from a no-caller ID number. "Your wife has been in a terrible accident," a man said. "You need to head to the hospital immediately." He then hung up. Well, since my wife was laying right next to me, I knew that was a lie. But that will give you some flavor of what happened next. This was the beginning of a torrent of anonymous hang-ups and death threats of various varieties. At a little past midnight, I simply stopped answering. By 7 a.m., my phone showed that I'd had over 240 such calls. Frankly, I didn't go back to listen to the messages since most of them are vile. But then I took a closer look at Malay, M-A-I-L-E, on X, formerly known as Twitter. as Twitter. For the last week, she's been online trying to use the recently released Epstein legal documents in an effort to distort the truth about the relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I'm the first American author in the country to fully expose the Epstein story, building on the groundbreaking reporting of investigative reporter Nick Bryant, who I fully accredit in my book, The Clintons' War on Women. It was Bryant who first broke the story for the now defunct Gawker. But here's what we do know. Yes, it's certainly true that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein knew each other. Yes, Donald Trump was on Epstein's plane exactly twice, to Palm Beach on a Friday and returning from Palm Beach to New York City, actually Teterboro, on a Sunday. On both occasions, Donald Trump was with his then-wife Marla Maples and his daughter Tiffany on the plane. Donald Trump never visited Epstein Island. In fact, Trump cut Epstein off after Epstein made an indecent proposal to a woman working at the spa at Mar-a-Lago, and before Epstein was convicted for sex crimes in Florida. You may remember that the Palm Beach city police chief conducted a full undercover investigation of Jeffrey Epstein and handed the state's attorney a case for child sex trafficking, rape of a minor, and other more serious crimes that would have ended Epstein where he belonged, behind bars for life. But the state's attorney strangely charged Epstein with one count of solicitation. After the police chief objected, that was changed to one count of solicitation of a minor. Epstein was sentenced to a 15-month sentence, of which I believe he only served 11 months. Now, the Clintons, on the other hand, visited Epstein's island 17 individual times. It was Jeffrey Epstein who provided the seed capital for the Clinton Global Initiative, as well as the Clinton Foundation. But the key thing is that the Clintons continued to receive both political and charitable donations from Epstein after he was convicted of sex crimes in Florida. The Clintons had a much closer relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, but this woman at Malay Public Relations is a propagandist and, well, I hate to say it, a fraud. Thanks to my friend Liz Crokin for pointing out that the woman at Malay, M-A-I-L-E-P-R, has been seeking to distort the truth about the Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump relationship while entirely ignoring the fact that it is the Clintons who were tight with Epstein. Well, after the debate and the Supreme Court ruling, which grants President Donald Trump immunity from acts undertaken during his presidency, the Democrats are in complete disarray. The Democrat governors met recently with Biden, and although they made a statement that was supportive, according to those present, Biden said there was nothing wrong with his health, only his brain. There is an extraordinary backstory going on in the Democratic Party, even as we speak. Joining us today to shed further light on the Democrats' dilemma will be former New Jersey U.S. Senator Robert Torricelli, a man who knows the inner workings of the Democratic Party intimately. He will fill us in on that. But suffice it to say that the sources that I trust in the Democratic Party tell me that entreaties to Michelle Obama, who I long have predicted would be the nominee of the Democratic Party, appear to have failed. See, I never said that she wanted to run or planned to run. I honestly believed that a runaway convention would nominate her as the single most important Democrat in the country. Turns out that the more likely nominee will be Kamala the Hyena Harris. Now, my sources tell me the meetings with the governors gave Biden some momentum, but the momentum is still against him. Large donors have really jumped ship. Nancy Pelosi's comments were very damaging. We're going to play those for you later when we interview Senator Torricelli. But Harris, surprisingly, has consolidated her position very quickly. And, you heard it here first, there are viable rumors that Kamala Harris will take Governor Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania governor, for the vice presidency, to try to alter the map. Now, initially, I thought it was unclear how the Democrats would deal with the issue of Joe Biden being locked on the ballot in Wisconsin and Nevada, where his name cannot be removed from the ballot. Very soon, Georgia will also lock in Biden's name. But then it occurred to me that electors to the Electoral College are not bound by law. This is the phenomenon known as the faithless elector. In fact, in 1960, a number of electors who were on slates certified by President John F. Kennedy in southern states actually cast their vote for Senator Harry F. Byrd Sr. Of Virginia. Now, this does not speak to the complexity of convincing people in Wisconsin and Nevada and perhaps Georgia. Texas is also going to lock its ballot relatively soon, that when they cast a vote for Biden, they're actually voting for the Democratic nominee, who at this juncture, we're not even sure who that is. But it does, of course, remind people of the situations regarding Joe Biden. I don't know about you, but I don't want somebody who is clearly suffering from severe mental deterioration with their finger on the nuclear trigger. This is why I'm very interested in Senator Bob Torricelli's analysis of the situation, and we have that coming up, as I said. Also joining us on the Roger Stone Show today, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who is someone I respect enormously in terms of his background and his unique perspective on America's geopolitical place in the world. He joins us with a grave warning and a solid prescription for America. And then George Papadopoulos, like me, a victim of the Mueller witch hunt, will join us to talk about what is happening around the country. I also want George to get into exactly what happened to him. Now, on July 4th, President Donald Trump challenged Joe Biden to more debates. Once again, he said, any time, anywhere. Amazing to me that everyone has forgotten that President Trump and President Biden have already agreed to a second debate, an ABC debate that is scheduled for September 10th. While I generally thought the best thing for President Trump to do while the Democrats are in the process of self-destructing was to sit back and say nothing, well, that's not Donald Trump's style. And on July 4th, he let rip, challenging Biden to a series of debates. I don't think the Democrats can afford to have Joe Biden on the debate stage again. Yet, only Friday, actually Thursday, at the White House, Biden yet again seemed confused and disoriented. He earlier told the Democratic governors in a private meeting there was nothing wrong with his health, only with his brain. The meltdown of the Democrats kind of reminds me of the statement that I often attributed to Napoleon, although I think it was actually Wellington who said, "Never interrupt your enemy while they are in the process of destroying themselves." Exactly what's going on today. 2 weeks ago, a paid Democrat activist posing as a progressive filmmaker, a woman named Lauren Windsor, released an illegally recorded video of me at Mar-a-Lago where I had the audacity to say that Republicans should use every legal and technical tool to ensure that the next election is honest. I also put forward a prediction based on my reading of the filings in the case that Judge Eileen Cannon of Florida will ultimately dismiss the sloppy and baseless so-called documents case against Donald Trump. I made this prediction completely based on my readings of the unredacted filings in that case. More aggravating is the fact that this surreptitious recording, in which Windsor and one of her co-conspirators pretended to be fangirls. This past week, Vanity Fair published a puff piece on Ms. Windsor in which she insisted that her recording of me was legal because it was recorded in a public place. Had it been a public place, that would be true. But under Florida law, both parties must be fully knowledgeable of a illicit or a secret recording or any recording. And in fact, the event at Mar-a-Lago was a ticketed event in which one needed Secret Service approval to attend. Her video against me, in which I said nothing wrong, but on which she is now profiteering by fundraising online, is also illegal because she posted it for profit, something very specifically spoken to in Florida law. I really am tired of this one Blackbird jumps off the phone wire, and they all do. Within minutes of Ms. Windsor posting this, the Daily Mail, the Rolling Stone, the Daily Beast, the Huffington Post, the rest of the fake news media were out with incredible headlines like Roger Stone reveals secret plan to steal the 2024 election. Folks, you can go to stonezone.com. There's a great story there I posted that's entitled Roger Stone Said Nothing Wrong. I posted the entire transcript. Decide for yourself. Anyway, you are tuned in to the Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC. We've got a lot more for you. Don't touch that dial because we will be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
And we're back on this fabulous 4th of July weekend. I hope you and your family had a happy, healthy, and joyous celebration of the independence of our country. I think the important thing to remember is on this great celebratory weekend, we must bolster our resolve to do everything within the confines of the law to preserve this great nation. The next several months are going to be crucial in terms of the direction America takes. Donald Trump may announce his vice presidential running mate as soon as next week, although he is, of course, the master of the tease, and he knows how to keep the media completely riveted. He has scheduled a rally next Tuesday in Doral, Florida, which gives him essentially 5 days to put together a rally. I'm still predicting a massive crowd at that rally. But one thing is clear in my mind, and this is just my opinion. I think President Trump would be wise to see what the Democratic candidate is going to ticket is going to look like before he makes his decision. One thing is absolutely clear, regardless of whether Joe Biden stays or goes, and I think that's still very much an open question, despite his telling folks yesterday that he wasn't going anywhere, and the reports that Hunter Biden has now emerged as his chief political advisor, while Jill Biden is playing the role of Edith Galt Wilson. Edith Wilson was the First Lady of the United States when Woodrow Wilson, president, was felled with a debilitating stroke in 1919, which affected him both mentally and physically. First Lady Wilson, with the acquiescence of the White House Chief of Staff, Colonel Edward Howe, essentially kept President Wilson out of public view. He was not seen for the balance of his presidency, something you could get away with in the pre-television mass media age, and she served as the de facto president. It is reported she would actually put a pen in Wilson's near lifeless hand and move it in order to sign crucial documents. But one thing is clear. The Democrat ticket, pardon me, I correct myself, is going to include a woman, one way or another. Now, if Kamala Harris does manage to supplant Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee, and she would be so foolish as to choose Hillary Clinton as her running mate, well, I think Kamala, if elected, would need a food taster. President Trump seems to have limited his choices, and the speculation now is between Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who has only just been elected to Senate. I like Vance very much. I like his issue positions. I like his energy. He has laudable military service to our country. But I question whether, after less than 2 years in the Senate, he has the stature or gravitas, the judgment, the temperament to be vice president and therefore potentially president. We may learn in a campaign that he has all of those things because, as Winston Churchill says, do you want to see how someone will govern? Watch how they conduct their campaign. On the other hand, the other candidate that is commonly mentioned gives me some serious pause. That would be Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota. Burgum has a number of things in his record that I find troubling. Now, I saw him speak at the Collier County, Florida Lincoln Reagan Day dinner, where I was also a speaker, along with the incredibly dynamic Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. But Burgum's actual record is somewhat disturbing. In 2021, Burgum was a vocal advocate for selling 300 acres of premium North Dakota farmland to a Chinese food manufacturing company. This is a location within 20 minutes of the Grand Forks Air Force Base, where our most sophisticated military drones are regularly tested. This gives me some serious pause. Burgum is also a crony of Bill Gates. Burgum actually made his fortune by seizing control of a company called Great Plains Software, a firm that provides accounting software to small and medium-sized businesses. He sold his company to Microsoft, that's Bill Gates, for $1.1 billion, becoming lifelong friends with Bill Gates in the process. And then, of course, there is the question of Burgum's record as governor, where he was a proponent of green energy, transgenderism, and he opposed school policy, choice in school policy. Burgum has also publicly disavowed Donald Trump on many occasions. Amidst the politically motivated prosecutions, Trump stated in 2023 that he would no longer be willing to do business with Trump. I don't think so, Burgum said when he was asked by NBC News. Then, of course, Burgum doesn't believe there was any fraud or anomalies or irregularities in the 2020 election. No, I was impressed with the way he speaks, but I come to the sad conclusion that Burgum's record should disqualify him. I fear that he is a globalist Trojan horse, very much someone the president would regret choosing. He may even be worse than Mike Pence. Now, I've made no bones about the fact, particularly now, that it is clear that one way or another, the Democrat Party, is going to have a woman on the ticket. And that's why I'm for Tulsi Gabbard. She's a former four-term Democrat congressman from Hawaii, who is now an independent. She has seen the light in a stunning new book about why she left the Democratic Party. She served 4 terms in the House as a Democrat before leaving that party. She's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. She's a decorated combat veteran in both the Iraq and the Kuwait conflicts. I think she has a unique appeal to Democrats and independents. Yet she is solid on the key issues of the war in Ukraine, where she would provide no more funding. She wants to seal our border. She is an avid shooter and strong supporter of our gun owners' rights through the Second Amendment, and she's strongly pro-life. She's also extraordinarily sure-footed. She's already taken Kamala Harris to the cleaners in a presidential debate back in 2020. Now, if it were me, I would take Tulsi Gabbard, but of course it is not up to me. We shall see, though. The one thing you can say about Donald Trump, the one thing you can predict, is that he is entirely and completely unpredictable. We got a lot of politics to go through today, folks. I'm glad you're here with us on the Roger Stone Show. You can listen to us, of course, worldwide at WABCRadio.com, where we're live streaming, I think it's 173 countries around the world, or you can stay tuned to at 770 on the AM dial. Either way, don't go anywhere, because as the great one, Jackie Gleason, used to say, away we go.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show on this very special 4th of July weekend. We see a Democrat Party, in turmoil. If I don't say that, I get a dozen emails correcting me. In complete turmoil. It is literally minute to minute. Joining me now is former U.S. Senator and 6-term Congressman from New Jersey, Robert Torricelli. Bob Torricelli is very respected by everyone in politics because prior to his election to the Congress. He was, like I have been, a political operative, a strategist, someone with a big picture outlook of American politics. He served as a deputy legislative counsel to New Jersey Governor Brendan Byrne, deputy counsel to Vice President Walter Mondale. He is a member of the Rutgers University Board of Governors from 1977 to 1982, and he is politically extraordinarily astute, and he knows everything that's going on in the Democratic Party, where he has many friends. Senator Bob Torricelli, thanks for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show.
Roger, thank you very much for having me, and thanks for a very generous introduction.
Well, it was heartfelt. I don't pretend to understand your party as well as I do mine. The nominating process itself is really quite different. But I had predicted some time ago that Michelle Obama would emerge after the collapse of Joe Biden. I firstly predicted that Biden would not be the nominee. Remains to be seen whether I'm right or wrong about that. My sources tell me that while many in the party would love to have Michelle Obama, that she has kind of turned away those entreaties, doesn't really want to run. My prediction was that she would be drafted, not that she would run or plan to run or try to run, but that she would be drafted in a runaway convention. I said that only because she is, without any question, probably the most popular Democrat in the country today who's eligible. Things appear to be trending now towards Vice President Kamala Harris. On the other hand, as you said privately, this is a minute-to-minute situation where nothing is clear. So give us some overview of what's happening.
Well, with your cautionary note that it is evolving so quickly, I think several things in the last 48 hours have been surprising. One, I think President Biden's situation has further deteriorated. There were a few comments made by leaders, I think, that did particular damage. I thought Nancy Pelosi's comments that he was the candidate as long as he wanted to be the candidate was less than a ringing endorsement. And clearly the major donors to the party are now sitting on their hands. So there is incredible pressure on Joe Biden. It has to be wrenching personally and for his family, but to also end his career under these circumstances. The second big surprise to me has been that I think, there's a deep Democratic bench, and I think Governor Newsom and Whitmer both came with considerable strength to this situation. Vice President Harris seems to have consolidated considerably in the last 48 hours. I think there has been some gravitation around her potential candidacy.
I must say, I think that Vice President Kamala Harris is very, very underrated as a tactician, as a political survivor. Willie Brown, the mayor of San Francisco, a longtime friend of mine, many years on my Stone Zone International Best Men's Dress list that I put out on New Year's year every day, has said as much. I think there's a tendency by Republicans to underrate her skills as a politician because of her rhetorical problems, the word salads that she often serves up. But it seems to me that she is the woman in the catbird seat. Let's go back to what Nancy Pelosi said. Can this nomination be taken from Joe Biden without his acquiescence, given the makeup of the delegates, the fact that he got 95% in the primaries? The Biden people reportedly have done a pretty good job of making sure the delegates are Biden people. If he refuses to go, can he be dethroned?
Let's look at that two ways. Legally and politically. Back in the day, the last time we had one of these considerable convention fights between Kennedy and Carter, and I was the staff director of the Rules Committee put there by President Carter, the answer to your question was you absolutely needed the acquiescence of the president. because the delegates were bound by party rules on the first ballot. Whether they liked the candidate or not, whether they wanted to or not, they were voting for that candidate. The rules have changed in one remarkable way. You are bound to that candidate unless a matter of conscience. So, in fact, delegates could, if they wanted to, if they came to the view that President Biden was not able and could not serve, and it was in the country's interest, they could not vote for him. Now, as you point out, there was a screening to choose those delegates. They were chosen by the Biden campaign. Many of them may be longtime loyalists. Some are just party activists. I wouldn't assume that if you put all of them to the test, they would all hold simply because they were put there by the Biden campaign, but many will. So legally, they could bolt for another candidate. Practically, I think it is very, very, very difficult. This is, in the end of the day, this is Joe Biden's decision.
That is also my belief. I think he has to go willingly. I also know him to be extraordinarily stubborn. I don't obviously know him anywhere near as well as you do, but when I worked for Senator Arlen Specter, and Specter and Biden would also often take the Amtrak home, stopping first, of course, in Wilmington and then in Philadelphia, I got to see Joe Biden up front. It always struck me that although we were in the club car, he never tipped any of the porters who brought him coffee. But we'll put that aside. The makeup of this convention is extraordinarily interesting. Is my understanding that more than 50% of the delegates, slightly more, to the convention are non-white, and more than 30% are from the more liberal labor unions. What are the implications of that?
Well, I think if the party actually opens the door to choosing a new candidate, there's a reason here to be extremely cautious. Any offending of the minority base of the Democratic Party would be fatal to any nominee. The base of the party is so dependent upon African American and Hispanic votes, which raises the issue of Vice President Harris. I think any decision to bypass her in favor of another candidate has just extraordinary risks. And it's not to say that half or a third or even a quarter of African Americans would desert the party. But in a constituency which routinely votes 90% for the Democratic nominee, if you lose 10%, 15%, it can be fatal. So I think any movement away from Vice President Harris has to be extremely careful.
You talk about the donor class. I hear this more and more for some of my other contacts in the Democrat Party. Yes, I do have a few. But that I'm hearing that the large donors, particularly the bundlers, have essentially zipped their wallets, that they're not prepared to step up. That and the fact that based on his appearance on the 4th of July, which interestingly enough, CNN domestically only showed clips of, but CNN International showed all of, actually, I think did further damage to him. He seemed confused. He seemed, he was almost incoherent at one point. I don't understand how he could possibly get through another debate. While I was one of those who said the best thing for President Trump to do right now was to say and do nothing other than continuing to hammer his own positive themes, to continue to raise record amounts of money. But being Donald Trump, on July 4th, he challenged Biden to more debates. I would also point out that he and President Biden have already agreed to one debate on September 10th with ABC. That has been confirmed. I'm not sure what happens to that debate. In your opinion, is it possible for President Biden to get through a presidential campaign without another debate?
I actually think it would have been possible. The fact that the staff not only agreed to, but proposed these debates I mean, historically, is going to be seen as incomprehensible. Whatever were they thinking? They obviously had exposure to Joe Biden on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. They were watching him closely. They had to know that the risks of what happened in that first debate were likely, if not probable. But they did it anyway. And people are going to spend years analyzing exactly how they ever made that decision. Now they're committed to a second debate in September. I don't see how politically you can get out of that debate. I believe they could have gotten out of all the debates simply by saying they weren't productive or disparaging President Trump in some way or another. I don't think it would have done enormous damage. It would have been done damage, but wouldn't have been fatal. Now, to pull out of this debate once scheduled, given what happened in Atlanta, I think is impossible and keep any candidacy viable. He has to go ahead if he's the candidate.
I have a theory about what happened there, but I don't think the blame belongs with Biden's staff. Having been a staffer to a presidential candidate, I note that when documents that the special counsel, Robert Hur, said that Biden had held on to in willful violation of the law were found in his garage in Wilmington, well, he blamed the staff. Again, the problem here, in my view, is not the staff, it's Joe Biden. But I think the idea here was to propose to Trump a debate proposal that he could not possibly accept. CNN.
I think that may be right. Yeah.
A network that is openly hostile to him, two moderators openly hostile to him, rules that would seem, based on his debate style, to be disadvantageous. No studio audience. Trump gets strength from people. He, unlike Hillary Clinton, he likes people. He gets strength from people. And then, of course, giving CNN unilateral control of the microphone so they could turn the microphones on and off when they felt like it. I did notice, by the way, one time they did let Joe Biden crosstalk in violation of their own rules. They had his microphone on while Trump was speaking. But putting that aside, I think that they thought that Trump would unilaterally reject this invitation. That would allow Biden to say, well, you see, he said anytime, anywhere. I proposed a perfectly reasonable venue. He refused. This issue is put to bed. No debates. I think Trump surprised them because he is a brawler. He is instinctive. He saw the challenge. It was the challenge he was for. He accepted it immediately. I know firsthand there were no meetings or staff consultations. This decision he made turned out to be a great decision. And then, oddly enough, I would argue that the debate rules in a certain way benefited him. He came across as focused, disciplined, didn't take the bait several times when Joe was lucid enough early in the debate to bait him, pounded Biden on both the border and the economy, had a very deft pivot on the question of January 6th. In the end, I think this was not the stupidest gambit by the Biden campaign until, of course, the instant that Donald Trump agreed to debate.
I actually agree with almost all of that. I'll add to a little. One, Donald Trump has the instincts of a cat, and to pounce on that opportunity was exactly the right thing to do. And I do agree. I think the Biden people thought they were setting up something that would not be agreed to. And CNN thought they were doing something that would work to the Biden advantage. It did not. The turning off of the mics, which was meant to handicap Donald Trump, were completely to his advantage because it gave him a verbal discipline he otherwise does not possess. But for that, he might have made the same mistake he made in 4 years ago and talk over his opponent and over himself and leave a bad impression. That actually worked to his advantage. The only thing I would add to your analysis, which otherwise I think is what history is going to establish, is that I suspect the staff was not entirely foolish enough to put President Biden in this situation without knowledge. I suspect that, like the ego of any president or any candidate, Joe Biden himself wanted to debate in spite of all logic and probably all advice. He probably took his own counsel on this, and much to his demise.
Yeah, I would just amend your comments to say I think Donald Trump has the nerve of a cat burglar. He is fearless. He's completely fearless. Senator, what is the role and influence in the Democratic Party today of former President Barack Obama?
I think that's a complex question. It is the relationship between Barack Obama and the Democratic Party is not, for example, what it was between Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party. Clinton so dominated the party after he left office for a period of years by his personality, but also because of his love of politics, the people, the rules, the issues. He was engaged on a regular basis. He left the White House, but he never really walked away, and he cared about the party. Barack Obama was never a party person. He didn't come from the Democratic Party. While he was in office, he didn't do much to strengthen the Democratic Party, actually on the reverse, and largely disappeared from the public scene other than a few cameo appearances here and there for candidates when he had to. So I do not think, while there's affection for Barack Obama and there's certainly respect for him, I don't think he has the kind of deep roots in the party that you would expect from a former president.
Certainly, he can still command enormous sums of money, and he remains.
He can do that, and a crowd, and attention. He can do all that when he wants to, but to date, he has often not wanted to. He's on living a different life, and I don't, I don't know, but from watching what people tell me, it's also if you're getting at the point of where he would be with Joe Biden. I don't sense a great affection between the two of them any longer. I think there's some considerable strains there, particularly from the people around them.
Well, of course, there's the famous quote, which everyone has heard, where where Barack Obama said, "Never underestimate Joe Biden's ability to F things up." And many of us are aware of that famous interview with Stephen Colbert, where Obama said how cool it would be if he could just hang out in his basement, in his sweats, with a microphone connected to the ear of whoever was his presidential successor, and essentially have a third term. There's not a conservative America hasn't watched that video. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show. I'm here with former Senator Robert Torricelli of the Garden State of New Jersey. And don't touch that dial, because we'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. If you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC. We are the crown jewel of AM radio, and I'm talking to Senator Bob Torricelli, six-term congressman, U.S. Senator from New Jersey, and we're talking about, among other things, the current situation in the Democratic Party. Senator, I kind of think Biden was in trouble before this debate based on his public performances. And I wonder, many Republicans now questioning, many Americans now questioning, whether he is a national security risk, whether we can have someone who appears to be in his current physical and mental condition with their finger on the nuclear button. There seems to be a disparity between his spokeswoman, who said that he has not had any medical examinations since his physical. He told the governors differently when he met with them. What are the national security implications here?
A disabled president without full control of his physical or mental abilities, that's the history of the Wilson administration and the debacle that came out of Versailles, which jeopardized a generation. And then, of course, my favorite president of all time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served the country so ably for so long. But you wonder those last couple of months at Yalta and the designing of the post-World War, how things might have been different if he had not been failing. I like Joe Biden personally. I've known him for 40 years. I served on the Foreign Relations Committee with him. I sat next to him on the committee for years. He's a fine man, but I like the country more than I like Joe Biden. And I care more about the country than I care about Joe Biden. And the country cannot have a disabled president. We simply cannot. There is too much going on in the world, the complexities of our economy, the challenges we have domestically, but mostly challenges with the Chinese and with the Russians and with the Iranians. It is a dangerous world, and somebody needs to be entirely focused on the situation at all times. And I personally, from what I witnessed in that debate, like millions of other Americans, I hope I'm wrong. I hope he proves me wrong. But there's a heavy burden right now on Joe Biden to prove that I am wrong. I don't see a man there who can meet those challenges.
I agree with your final analysis there. I talked early in the show, of course, about Woodrow Wilson and his incapacitation. I do think we might have gotten a better deal at Yalta. Remember, the man at FDR's right elbow was Alger Hiss, a man later proved to be a Soviet spy once the records at the KGB became fully available to us. A fact exposed by one Congressman, Richard Milhouse Nixon. All politics being local, I have to ask you about the New Jersey Senate race. I remember the 1970 Connecticut Senate race in which Tom Dodd was a popular Democrat, had been disgraced in an ethics probe, insisted after being censured by the Senate on running for re-election, could not be nominated in his party, ran as an independent in a three-way race with Congressman Lowell Weicker from the Fairfield County District of Connecticut, the 4th District, and the Reverend Joe Duffy, who had beat the party organization as an anti-war candidate. And of course, Lowell Weicker won that race in a three-way race as a Republican, I think with as little as 42% of the vote. Now, New Jersey Republicans are trying to say that this could happen again. They have nominated Curtis Bashaw, a businessman from South Jersey who was not President Trump's choice for the nomination. The Democrats have, I guess you've chosen a member of Congress. How do you see this race? I kind of doubt, Dodd got 12% of the vote. I don't see Bob Menendez getting 12% of the vote or even 9% of the vote, but then I don't live in New Jersey and I'm pretty far removed from the situation. What do you think?
I think it is unlikely that it is a Dodd, Connecticut situation. For one thing, Bob Menendez is not facing censure in the Senate. He is more likely to be headed to jail. He can threaten a third-party candidacy, and the polls are showing he might get 3% of the vote. But it is more likely he's going to be worried about incarceration. We'll know this week because it goes to the jury probably by midweek. But from what I was watching from the case, although it's always difficult to speculate on a criminal case when you're not in the courtroom, I cannot imagine him surviving this. The evidence is so overwhelming. His conduct is so egregious. It isn't just simply a question of violating laws for his own greed. He betrayed the country. The evidence is to be believed. So I don't think he presents any kind of viability of a third party. And Andy Kim is a good candidate. He was an able member of Congress. He's the right candidate at the right time. He's outside of the Democratic establishment, independent to a fault, smart, driven. I'm excited about his candidacy, and I think he'll be very strong, although I will note the polls are closer than one might have imagined.
I've not seen any polling on it, but in a state like New Jersey and the way it's been trending, I would think that the margin would not be such that Menendez could affect it, and that assumes that he remains as an independent candidate if he's convicted. I do think it's pretty despicable, as he has tried to blame his wife for everything that happened. Oh, that was all my wife. This is 2 times for Senator Menendez.
It's all despicable. And, I know people say to me all the time, well, these kinds of things happen in the Congress. No, they don't. I was in the Congress for 20 years. My worst opponent in the Republican Party, the people I got along with the least, I would not have suspected, accused, mentioned, even thought that they would do something that was not in the national interest. Writing a letter for a foreign government, revealing the names of U.S. Embassy employees in Cairo that could jeopardize their lives. No one has done it, and I never would have suspected it. It is despicable behavior.
All right, so much for Senator Menendez. I'm afraid we are out of time. I want to thank our guest, Senator Bob Torricelli, for joining us this special July 4th weekend edition of the Roger Stone Show. Senator, thank you very much for being with us.
Roger, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on this very special July 4th weekend edition of the Roger Stone Show. Now we are both honored and privileged to have Colonel Douglas Macgregor as our guest. Colonel Macgregor is a decorated combat veteran, an author of 5 books, a PhD, and a defense and foreign policy expert. Colonel Macgregor was commissioned in the regular Army in 1976. He was at VMI and West Point. In 2004, he retired from the U.S. Army with the rank of colonel. In 2020, President Donald Trump appointed Macgregor to serve as senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense, a post he held until President Trump left office. More importantly, Colonel Macgregor is, in my view, perhaps the most brilliant, the most incisive, the most blunt, and the most thoughtful analyst of America's geopolitical situation. And it is not only a great honor to have him, but I'm going to start this by playing a short recording to set the table, because his analysis, to me, is right on. Let's roll it.
Americans, the media worked closely with the White House to conceal the truth that was on display last night. President Biden is not fit to discharge the immense duties of the presidency. The alarming evidence of his cognitive decline was on display for all to witness. Yet his enablers and political allies continue to exploit the president to substitute their destructive agenda for the interests of the American people. The unconscionable betrayal of the sacred trust that must exist between the federal government and American citizens is all around us. Destructive executive orders and policy directives, many of which were likely signed when President Biden was in a rapidly diminished state of mind, inflicted tremendous damage on our nation. By opening our southern border, unelected men and women in the White House allowed millions of migrants to illegally enter our country. To these must be added lethal drugs like fentanyl and the endless numbers of human traffickers surging into our communities, jeopardizing the safety and security of our families, especially our children. The executive orders related to energy policy prioritized the demands of climate change advocates over the needs of hardworking Americans. The outcome is skyrocketing energy costs and the end of our energy independence. This is not governance. This is pandering. Reckless spending and money printing has triggered record high inflation. This is not the leadership we deserve. The deliberate subversion of the presidency also extends to foreign and defense policy. President Biden's manipulators fueled a proxy war in Ukraine that risks drawing us into a catastrophic confrontation with nuclear-armed Russia. Their unqualified support for Israel's disproportionate actions in Gaza erodes our moral authority and credibility as a champion of peace and stability. These actions drained our defense resources and compromised our moral standing in the world. Sadly, President Biden's fragile mental state was laid bare for all to see in last night's debate. His responses were frequently incoherent. He appeared lost, even confused, struggling to complete basic thoughts. It was heartbreaking, a spectacle that confirmed our worst fears about his deteriorating capacity. No individual whose mental health is compromised should be allowed to continue in the most demanding job on earth. Americans, we find ourselves at a critical juncture in our nation's journey. In the private sector or in matters of estate planning, the validity of signatures made under such circumstances would be challenged and invalidated in a court of law. How can we accept crucial national decisions being made under these conditions? The American people deserve better. It is time to ask, who truly governs this country? Is it we, the people, as our founders intended, or have we surrendered control to unelected bureaucrats, sprawling federal agencies, and affluent donors who do not have the best interests of ordinary Americans at heart? To secure the blessings of liberty for this generation and those to come, we must reclaim the rightful sovereignty of the American people over a dysfunctional and unresponsive political establishment. We cannot tolerate more aimless, self-defeating leadership and unaccountable governance. We confront existential threats at home, and the Biden administration has cultivated hatred and hostility to the United States abroad. President Biden should retire with grace and dignity and not be cruelly exploited in the twilight of his life. To say it's a national shame is an understatement. This travesty should end immediately. It is now obvious that the governing power to determine our nation's destiny lies in unelected hands. Americans must raise their voices in opposition to this administration. The power belongs to the American people. We must signal our discontent with policies we did not vote for: open borders, wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, soaring inflation, uncontrolled immigration, and demand the right to register our indignation at the ballot box. In view of the questionable legitimacy of the many executive orders issued under President Biden's signature, Americans should consider holding the presidential election early. It's time for Americans to demand a new government that is legitimate, one that is devoted to peace abroad and prosperity at home. It is a time for unity, a time to go forward and begin the next chapter of the most remarkable story ever told, the story of the United States of America. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and may God bless these United States.
Colonel Douglas Macgregor, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Oh, thank you, Roger. That's quite a welcome.
Well, it was so good I had to play all of it because I think you are so completely on the money. It's abundantly clear that our chief executive has been incapacitated for some time, and that has been hidden from the American people. You're the first person I have seen to raise the very legitimate question of the validity of any document or policy that he signed while in that condition. I also think your call for an early election is completely reasonable. I'm not certain logistically exactly how it would work, but there is no exaggeration in any of your speeches and your interviews, and I try to watch most of them, about the grave danger this country faces. So let me begin there. How close are we to World War III, both in the theater that includes Ukraine and Russia, and perhaps even in the Middle East?
Well, that's a critical question. I would say, frankly, that we are on the edge of the abyss, staring into it. And most Americans are completely unaware of it because for Americans over the last 30 years at least, war has been something that happened on somebody else's soil, remote from the United States with no discernible impact. I'm sure you remember, as I do, when George W. Bush was asked, what should we as Americans do after 9/11? And later on, it came up again during the invasion of Iraq. And I think both occasions he said something along the lines of, well, go shop, go to the mall. And I think that's part of the problem. You and I can say, well, we're very close to a confrontation with the Russians. We keep pushing the envelope there, sending more and more lethal long-range strike weapons that have no chance whatsoever of changing the outcome on the ground in Ukraine, but can certainly be used to kill Russians inside Russia. And the Russians keep telling us, we're not going to tolerate this. And you're getting closer to the point where we will feel compelled to take action. And they talk about striking targets, certainly in Eastern Europe and NATO countries. And we seem to brush that off. And at the same time, in the Middle East, we've got Mr. Netanyahu, who is doubling down on his failed policy of war with a plan to widen it into southern Lebanon, to the point where even the senior leaders of the Israeli Defense Force are saying, look, what we really need is a ceasefire, because they've been badly hurt in Gaza. They're taking losses up in northern Israel, and they have serious doubts about their ability to master the situation in southern Lebanon. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the Israelis are in a position where they may think that it's necessary for them to use a nuclear weapon, which has always been on the table, unfortunately. And we don't know what that would provoke, but we worry that once you use a nuclear weapon, you open the box and everybody feels comfortable pulling theirs out and using it as well. So I think we're close, Roger, closer than anybody wants to admit.
Very, very, very scary. You heard, as I did, President Donald Trump in the debate pledge that he could solve the Russian-Ukrainian conflict through negotiation extremely quickly. I am mindful that at the very beginning, before the first bullets flew, Joe Biden said that even he was prepared to give up parts of Ukraine, specifically the Donbass, in a quest for peace. Yet today, we have no peace negotiations even going on. There aren't even peace talks. The talks that were going on having been, I believe, vetoed by our State Department. Now, Antony Blinken, a man who is no better at the guitar than he is at statecraft, has announced that in September that Ukraine will join NATO, which seems to me to be a violation of the Budapest Memorandum signed by Secretary of State James Baker on behalf of the United States, in which we agreed that if the Russians agreed to the unification of East and West Germany, that we would not push Ukraine 1 inch, as he said, further east into NATO. We're also in violation, therefore, of the Minsk Accords. The real issue here, despite the fake news media, I don't think is the territorial ambitions of Vladimir Putin. It is that he does not want NATO, meaning American-funded missiles, pointed at Russia on the ground in Ukraine. Do I have that right?
Oh, I think you're 100% correct.
I mean, Max Blumenthal, whose politics are certainly not mine, a left-wing journalist, I think has established that the silos for these missiles have already been built. If they are, in fact, prepared to force the question with NATO, then we can only conclude that they want world war.
Well, this is crazy, and it's hard to even begin to imagine. And I'm certainly delighted that President Trump wants to negotiate. The problem that he'll be up against is that there's not much reason for the current leadership in Moscow to believe anything we say, because we've lied to them prolifically. So the notion that you could bring this to a rapid close, I think, is a bit optimistic. The Russians will ultimately terminate this war on their terms. And we're not really going to have too much of a role in it, I suspect. The best thing we could do, the first thing that President Trump should do, is immediately suspend all military aid to Ukraine. And what we should consider is obviously providing some humanitarian assistance. If anything was needed in Ukraine, that's what they need. They don't need any more warfighting equipment or any more war for that matter. If he did that and then expressed the view that things had to change inside the NATO alliance, some people think it should just be abolished or abandoned. But again, that's something that will happen, I think, in time, but it's not going to happen immediately. But those are the kinds of actions that would make a difference. And if President Trump does that, then there's a chance that we can begin repairing our relations with Russia, because there's no interest on the part of the United States to live in a state of perpetual conflict with anybody, least of all Russia.
Colonel, what's the state of our current military? Do we even have the ability to theoretically fight a two-theater war?
No, and we haven't had that for a long time. In fact, when we said we had it, we really didn't. And that's back in the 90s. And today the military is a shadow in terms of the numbers of trained and ready soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines. The equipment leaves much to be desired. We're still using a lot of equipment that was designed in the 70s for fielding in the 80s. The whole thing is not organized to be effective. Warfare, technology have changed, societies have changed, and the military is really a tribute to the past. And as I'm sure you're aware, and a lot of other people have figured it out, we've lost our stocks of munitions that would have certainly helped us at the outbreak, at the outset of any major war. Right now, we have no hot assembly lines running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with multiple shifts to turn out missiles, all kinds of missiles, rockets, and munitions, artillery ammunition, whatever. And yet we talk about going to war, and we don't seem to understand that what I just described, the near 24-hour-a-day operation in all the major manufacturing facilities that support the Russian military establishment are ongoing. They are on a war footing, and they now have perhaps the best ground force, certainly the best army in the world, if for no other reason, because all the weaklings and the poor officers, the mediocre leaders have been flushed out of it. And it's now a battle-hardened formation. And we need to stop talking about the Russians as though Russia was some sort of backwater. It's bizarre, but that's what people inside the Beltway seem to think.
Well, we were, of course, fed for over 2 years this narrative that the Ukrainians were kicking the daylights out of the Russians. My good friend General Flynn, our mutual friend, assured me that based on everything he knew, that was never true. Then we were told that their spring offensive was going to turn the war around. That also hasn't happened. Appears to me like they are out of men, above all, out of men. Even Zelensky now calling for a solution, for a ceasefire. I like Donald Trump. I'd like to just see an end to the killing. If you even opine on these subjects, you're immediately labeled, some kind of Russian stooge. I had members of my own family mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956. So to me, that is most offensive. I don't like the authoritarian regime of Vladimir Putin any more than I like the authoritarian regime of Volodymyr Zelensky. You speak about our shortage of munitions. I read this past week, President Joe Biden is drawing down the petroleum reserves essentially to zero, selling that oil to big oil companies who can now sell it retail for gasoline. He's doing this to bring the price down before the election. But what are the national security implications of this move?
Oh, they're horrendous. I mean, we've been watching the casual disregard for American national security for the last, I would argue, 4 years. And we've seen what can happen very, very quickly inside our country, but in many countries in Europe with regard to energy. And our energy grid is old. The electrical grid is old. Our fuel reserves are, as you point out, at the lowest levels they've been in decades. There's a sense that of total disregard for all the possibilities. And then you continually hear from people the discussion of war. It just doesn't make any sense. But the problem, Roger, is how do we get Americans to wake up? I mean, I love this country and I love the people in it, but Americans are just not alert. They're not alarmed. If they had any understanding of what you and I are discussing, they would be in the streets by the millions.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Our Country, Our Choice. You can find them at ourcountryourchoice.com. We're going to be right back with more of Colonel Macgregor, so please don't touch that dial.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Thanks for joining us on this 4th of July weekend. We're back with Colonel Douglas Macgregor, served ably to President Donald Trump as the senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense. Today, he is the Chief Executive Officer of Our Country, Our Choice, a grassroots organization seeking to educate the American people about the very real dangers America faces. You can find them at ourcountryourchoice.com. I urge you to go there to see more about the extraordinary efforts by Colonel Macgregor. Colonel Macgregor, I noticed that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., an independent presidential candidate, it is still in my mind unclear whether he will, in fact, garner the ballot access in enough states to theoretically win 270 electoral votes. He claims that he will, but having run this process one time for the Libertarian Party candidate, Governor Gary Johnson, I understand the complexities and the enormous expense. But Kennedy says that there is no military threat from China, that they don't pose a military threat to us. Yet last week on this very show, Christy Hutchison with Women Fighting for America, who's extremely knowledgeable about what's going on both our southern and northern border, noted the disproportionate number of military-age Chinese and Middle Eastern ethnic illegals entering the country. If you had to tell us what China's master plan is, do they intend to just take us over from inside, because they have burrowed into all strata of American life? They're in big business, they're in academia, they're buying up huge swaths of real estate, not just around military installations, but also prime ranch land and farmland that's used to provide food for this country. What is the Chinese strategy, as best you can tell?
Well, you just identified what the real threat is. That most people in Asia are familiar with it because they've lived with the Chinese for thousands of years. It's not military. The Chinese military is probably, compared with the Japanese, several levels below the competence and capabilities of the Japanese armed forces. It's wholly defensive in orientation. But China's principal threat is its economic imperialism and its fecundity. If you go back in Asia, you introduce large numbers of Chinese into a particular country. They not only rapidly reproduce, they're very tribal, they hang together, and they begin pooling their money and their assets in order to do exactly what you're describing, buy up businesses, buy up territory. And all of a sudden, after about a decade, people in the country wake up and say, well, what happened to our country? We no longer own it. We don't govern it. I think that's a serious problem. And it's why I keep going back to the border. People say, well, the Chinese are doing this, and we have all these people coming in from the Middle East. Well, close the border. For God's sakes, close the border. That has to happen. We should have 50, 60,000 troops on the border right now. That place should be locked down tight as a drum. We're living next to Mexico, which is an organized crime state. It survives on the money that it makes from us for all the drugs and human trafficking that go on. But they're not going to stop anybody from anywhere going into the United States. They'll facilitate it. They see these people as potential customers, and anything that weakens us internally is good for their business. So the first thing is close it down. Second, you've got to enforce the law. And as I tell people all the time, you're worried about China. They say, oh, yeah, I'm very worried about China. I said, well, then why don't we expel the Chinese inside the United States? And they say, well, shouldn't we go to war? No, you don't go to war, but send the Chinese home. Most of these young men, by the way, that are coming in are not military. A lot of these, in fact, I would say almost half of them, are wanted by Chinese authorities. They're white-collar criminals. The Chinese government would like to get them back and prosecute them. But remember something that historically, and the Koreans will tell you this, the Japanese will tell you this, the Vietnamese will tell you, they all understand this. They will tell you that every Chinese that leaves China is taken aside and said, now you understand, wherever you go, whatever you do, if you find anything of value to China, you send it back to China. And this has been going on for thousands of years. So the presence of large numbers of Chinese in any of the Asian countries, in Canada, now here in the United States, these communities are sources of intellectual property, money, understanding, power, territory, all of those things combined for China. And that's the threat. And that's what we should be concerned about. But for some reason, it doesn't get a lot of attention. I'm glad that people are seeing these young men come in, but I don't see them as a military threat or a threat of violence. The people we should be worried about in terms of violence, other than the Mexican cartels and organized crime, are these Islamists. And for years, Hezbollah has had a large chapter down in Mexico. We've always known that if we end up in a war with Iran, that we're going to have hell to pay here inside the United States. ISIS is strongly represented down in Mexico. Again, you never hear these things. And that doesn't even begin to address the larger problem of immigration in terms of financial costs to the country, the destruction of our society, the dilution of our national identity. We go on and on. Those things are where we ought to focus right now. And we ought to get all the troops that we have sitting on the border with Ukraine up and down, and most of the ones that are sitting, in my judgment, in places like Okinawa and South Korea, and they should be on our borders as soon as possible.
All right. We are almost out of time. Tell us about Our Country, Our Choice, which you can contact at ourcountryourchoice.com, and the important work you're doing there.
Well, Our Country, Our Choice was founded by a group of Americans who said, we continue to vote. We vote for Democrats. We vote for Republicans. We don't get any fundamental change in policy. Nothing improves. So we can't go on like this. So we want to found an organization that is going to appeal to Democrats and Republicans across party lines. And we want to unite around critical issues. We want to unite the country, not divide it. So we want to avoid divisive issues. So let's start with the issues that we're talking about. The border is clear and unambiguous. The restoration of the rule of law inside the United States and our cities. That's number one. Ending these overseas interventions that have cost us trillions of dollars, destroyed hundreds of thousands of lives. People tell me all the time, well, we didn't take that many casualties. How many American servicemen or veterans kill themselves on a daily basis in this country? I'm telling you, we've destroyed hundreds of thousands of American lives in these things. We've wasted money. A small elite has profited, but as far as the country is concerned, we have not benefited from any of this. And this goes back to the kinds of things that Donald Trump kept saying when he was in Japan on a visit, when he was in Europe. What do we get out of it? Where's our return on investment? And of course, he was always right. And then finally, what are we doing about the sexualization of our children? What are we doing about what they read in school and how they are being groomed and misled and told they're something they're not and confusing them? What are we doing about this assault on our national identity, our culture, our way of life? Why the constant denigration of everything that is American? We're dealing with a government that is hostile to us. And I think we need to realize this. I think Americans sense it, but it's very serious. And we're going to be lucky to survive it. And that's one of the reasons that, I called for an early election. Obviously, President Biden should not have to be in office, and he should be removed. I Most people agree with that. But the problem is that won't get us out of the mess we're in right now. If we can get an early election and hold a fair and honest election, go back to basics and say it has to all be paper ballot. You have to show up on the day of voting. None of this nonsense of, absentee ballots that come out of outer space and then end up in great quantities in the hands of people. Hold a real election. Make people walk in and say, yes, I am a citizen of the United States. This is where I legally live, and prove it. If we went to that, we could have a new government in short order. And I think that could be a very successful election. I mean, India has 1 billion people, and they managed to hold elections, national elections, on one day, all with paper ballots, count it, and the next day they know what the new government looks like. So if India can do that with almost 1 billion people, surely we can do the same thing here.
All right, I want to thank our guest, Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Once again, you can find him at OurCountryOurChoice.com. Colonel, thank you for joining us on this very special July 4th weekend.
Roger, thanks so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks, for our final segment of The Roger Stone Show on this very special 4th of July weekend. Joining me now is George Papadopoulos. George Papadopoulos was a foreign policy advisor to President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, but more precisely, he is a man who, like me, was targeted by special counsel Robert Mueller, and I think, like me, has never really had the opportunity to tell the full story of how we was victimized. I could actually probably market a T-shirt that said George Papadopoulos did nothing wrong, and he joins us now from Los Angeles. George, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Roger, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's walk through this because it is not written. You have a great book, but unfortunately, you know how that is. The Washington Post won't be reviewing it anytime soon, nor will the New York Times review of books. But walk my audience through how you were victimized in the 2016 campaign.
Yeah, it's a very dark chapter in American history, and I definitely like that idea of this shirt. The Roger Stone did nothing wrong, Papadopoulos did nothing wrong, because I think in many ways we definitely have a parallel story when it came to really supporting what at that time was an incipient populist, nationalist candidate, and an entire movement that was just ascending and reverberating throughout the entire United States and arguably around the world when after Brexit. So I had worked before that movement started with a lot of these so-called establishment types at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. A lot of these W. Bush people, Reagan officials, people like Douglas Feith, Scooter Libby, these type of people. And the summer of 2015 comes around, and I realized that after disastrous years of the W administration, disastrous years of the Obama administration, that America needed change. And that change, of course, was Donald Trump. As soon as Donald Trump went down those escalators, I think around 12 hours later, I messaged Corey Lewandowski, who many people, of course, didn't know at the time. No one, of course, knew who I was at the time. It was you and a couple others who were notable on the campaign. And I said, I think you have a winner here. I want to join this campaign. Moving forward, the campaign didn't expand for a while. I joined Ben Carson's campaign as a foreign policy advisor, and right when I joined Trump's campaign, actually I should say before even the Washington Post knew that I joined Trump's campaign in March of 2016, there was an ongoing operation that later was revealed by the CIA that was there to quote-unquote bump officials like myself, you, 25 others, to essentially create the fix that would later go on to become Crossfire Hurricane, Mueller, Impeachment 1.0, 2.0, and then it goes on and on until Trump's recent conviction.
So tell us about this mysterious professor, Professor Mifsud. Who is this guy and where is he and what role did he play here?
So when I first started on the Trump campaign, I was actually based in London, and this is why things get really murky here, because what the report revealed in March of this past year, so just recently, about 4 months ago or so, was that there was an operation that was launched essentially in London that was at the behest of not only the CIA, but the Five Eyes intelligence sharing countries, which includes the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, the United States, and Australia. So what these countries do essentially, Roger, and for all your listeners, is they share intelligence. If the United States has a citizen who's living in London, let's say, or abroad, they can call the British intelligence services and say, hey, look, this American, in theory, has protections under the Constitution that we can't penetrate, so why don't you do our dirty work for you? So the point I'm making is, when I started on the campaign, I was introduced in Rome to this guy, Mifsud. Now, Mifsud, for many of your viewers who remember, is at the heart of not only the Mueller investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, the Horowitz investigation, but also the Durham investigation. He was introduced to me by the Italian foreign minister, Vincenzo Scotti. So we're talking very high-level people here facilitating meetings to a man who later became the center of an espionage scandal against Donald Trump and Donald Trump's campaign. That included foreign intelligence groups. So he tells me unsolicited one day over brunch, hey, did you know that the Russians are doing something with Hillary? And I said nothing about it. You know, there was a lot of rumors in the media for months at that time that Hillary's email server was, sabotaged, that she had her own private server. So it really was part of this entire narrative that they used people like him. They used people that bumped into you, that you've talked about, others like Michael Flynn that they were running into to create this fake pretext to launch these fake investigations that went absolutely nowhere except completely destroying the credibility of the United States government and the FBI.
Now, interestingly enough, John Solomon at Just the News reported that the prosecutor in your case, Aaron Zelinsky, just happened to also be the prosecutor in my case, actually altered the FBI 302, that when you were asked by the FBI if you would help locate the elusive Professor Mifsud, you said yes, of course, but they altered your 302 to say no, that you would not. This is, to me, egregious prosecutorial misconduct. Have you, although it may go nowhere, of course, have you considered filing a formal complaint over that?
Well, absolutely, Roger. And what I've been very disappointed in Congress, because I felt, first and foremost, and I've said this since the beginning, if they held them accountable for what they did to the 2016 campaign, which you were a victim of yourself and Donald Trump was a victim of, and more importantly, over 75 million patriots who voted for President Trump were the ultimate victims, who saw their vote basically potentially usurped and replaced by the administrative states. If those people that concocted Crossfire Hurricane, Comey's, the McCabe's, Mueller, people like Mifsud and all these foreign governments that targeted the campaign and basically were involved in the worst political dirty trick in modern American history, I don't think Donald Trump would have, first of all, been raided. He would not have been indicted, and certainly we would have never seen him in a kangaroo court in New York and all these various bizarre cases that are going on around him. And when it comes to the egregious misconduct of the Mueller prosecutors, it goes to exactly what I said. They got away with doing it to me, to you, to others, so they continued this lawfare with Donald Trump. So, of course, Congress, I felt, especially during the Durham testimony, had an opportunity to basically hammer it home, take all these people down, subpoena witnesses that Durham clearly felt he couldn't publicly expose, but they decided not to do it. It seems like they want to sweep this underneath the rug of history. And based on that, it's making my case very difficult to litigate because a lot of the information, including from this mysterious Joseph Mifsud, has never been declassified. John Durham basically stood there stone-faced and said, I can't talk about this guy. So it's making life very difficult, not only for my case, myself, but, of course, transparency and accountability for the United States and its people.
I know exactly how you feel. My case is still sealed, and I'm not allowed to even speak about it, except for in extraordinarily general terms. I honestly think this is why those who oppose President Trump are prepared to do whatever is necessary to stop him, because some of them, not all of them obviously, but some of them realize that they are guilty of treason and they are prosecutable. No, this is not about revenge. It's about equal protection under the law. I was charged with lying to Congress in my voluntary testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. But in order to violate the False Statements Act, which is what they charged me with, your statement has to be willful, but more importantly, it has to be material. I never had any motive whatsoever to lie. I told the truth about two things. One, that I simply set up a Google News alert on my computer and very carefully followed what Julian Assange was saying. Assange himself said that he had information on the Democrats and Hillary that he would release. And I relied on one source, New York radio host Randy Credico, who told me in a text message that this information would come down in October, that it would be political dynamite. And when I asked him how he knew that, he said that he knew a woman lawyer who worked for WikiLeaks, and I shouldn't ask any more questions about it. The Mueller prosecutors had that text in writing, proves that everything I said was true. But nonetheless, I learned the hard way that in the District of Columbia, no non-Democrat, no Trump supporter certainly, no Republican, no free thinker, no one whose political beliefs are adverse to the ruling party can expect a fair trial. To this day, I look at the parallels between what they did to Trump and what they did to me. In order for the financial transactions involved in the New York so-called hush money matter, those transactions would have to be material to, related to, or designed to cover up some underlying criminal activity. Yet, District Attorney Alvin Bragg is unable to identify what that would be. Otherwise, those charges would be a misdemeanor, and it would be a business records case in which you usually pay a small fine. It only becomes a criminal case if you can demonstrate that it was covering some underlying federal crime. Just as Judge Amy Berman Jackson would not allow me to bring Bill Binney, the former CIA counterintelligence officer and IT expert, as an expert witness in which I could have proved between his testimony and forensic evidence that the Democratic National Committee was never hacked by the Russians or anyone else, and whatever information Julian Assange had to have been the source of a leak rather than a hack. Now that Assange is free, even though he has pled to get his current freedom, I'm hopeful actually that he will speak out. By the way, he said on many occasions that while he enjoyed the way that I was trolling the Democrats on my Twitter profile before, of course, it was suspended, that I had received nothing from him. I did not work from WikiLeaks. The one contact I have with them is innocuous, but that didn't stop the New York Times from putting it in a headline. It is one of the great travesties of our time. Because I was under a gag order, much like Donald Trump in New York, I've never had a chance to tell my side of the story. But I will. Of course, it'll be ancient history by that time. I am laboring at a book that may lay this all out before I ride on ahead, as they say. But I'm more interested in the fight going on today. I really think that what we've seen just over the last 10 days in the debate, in this correct Supreme Court decision that is just making Democrats go out of their minds. I saw Zoe Lofgren, the congresswoman from Northern California, couldn't tell whether she was drunk or not, but she actually suggested that Biden should order the military to take out, I assume that means kill, the 3 conservative members of the U.S. Supreme Court who ruled adverse to what she wanted. Now, if I did that, the FBI would raid my home yet again. But she does this with impunity. It is an extraordinary double standard. Do you feel that way, George?
Yeah, Roger. I mean, it was really as astonishing as it was predictable to watch the Democrats' heads explode with this Supreme Court immunity ruling. And it was no surprise, like I mentioned, to see them actually resort to basically dog whistles of violence. We've seen it started, of course, with Obama, who prevented the smooth transition of power. They always say that Trump is all about trying to maintain power, control power, and to eviscerate the institutions, the rule of law, and normalcy in America, while the Democrats, who have weaponized the U.S. Legal system against their political opponents, have done just that. And the moment that they can't, usurp and replace the powers to be, which is currently a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, now they want to expand the court. Now they want to diminish the legitimacy of certain justices on that court, including Thomas. Try to put these people under the microscope, send protesters at their homes. If Alito puts up a flag that they don't like, go send protesters to threaten him. If Clarence Thomas goes on a vacation with his wife, go investigate him. This is what the Democrats have resorted to. They are the sore losers. They are the ones that have one interest and only one interest in mind, and that is consolidating power against the will of the American people. And certainly I believe that the entire premise of this lawfare operation against Trump was because they understood that it was going to eventually reach the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was going to rule against these unconstitutional efforts by the Democrats. But the effort was not even simply about Trump as much as it was about the credibility of the Supreme Court. And that's exactly why the Supreme Court, as much as Donald Trump, has become squarely in the crosshairs of their efforts to delegitimize these institutions and individuals.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to George Papadopoulos, who was a foreign policy advisor to President Trump's 2016 campaign. He, like me, got jammed up in the Russian collusion hoax. We have one other thing in common. Neither one of us did anything wrong. We're going to be right back with a bit more of George Papadopoulos. In the meantime, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. This is the Roger Stone Show and our very special July 4th weekend show. I'm pleased to have my good friend George Papadopoulos with us. George was a foreign policy advisor to President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. He was also outrageously targeted in the Mueller witch hunt. He's written a terrific book, Deep State Target, which you can get any place where books are sold. You can get it Barnes & Noble or Amazon. It is a great read because if it happened to him, my friends, it can happen to you. Again, Deep State Target. Urge you to pick that up from my friend George Papadopoulos. George, we were together last week, and I know that you are by nature an optimist, and I know you travel very frequently, and I know you believe that President Donald Trump is about to make perhaps the greatest comeback in American political history. Do you still feel that way?
I feel that way more than ever before, Roger. There's a reason I never got off the so-called Trump train, and I've been on it since the summer of 2015, because I've always understood one thing, most importantly. It's not simply about one man. It's about the people. It's about a movement, and it's about their will, and it's about addressing the various woes that face America today and since, I would say, the beginning of the last decade, and that includes security considerations, political considerations, and most importantly, economic. But then you also have the societal changes that have emerged that are really transforming America into something unrecognizable. You have parents basically losing their rights to the state. You have various agendas, some of them which are foreign, imported into the United States, which I always understood as somebody who loves this country, born and raised in this country, albeit in a very liberal city like Chicago initially, and now I live in Los Angeles. I know that America is a center-right country at its core, and I wasn't surprised to see Donald Trump basically ascend once again and come back, basically be part of I would say, the greatest political comeback in American history, when so many within the Republican Party and even some within his own team thought that he was, basically gone after the January 6th so-called events that happened on that day. And basically just watching him take out various establishment types from Nikki Haley to DeSantis, it reminded me a lot of the 2016 campaign, Roger, that you remember very well, too. You had the establishment with unlimited money, super PAC money going in, a lot of these elite donors, Hollywood donors, the singers of the world coming in, basically trying to prop up these candidates like DeSantis, who just never resonated with the American people. They didn't have the charisma. They didn't have the background. They didn't have the decades of public service the way that Donald Trump did, and the same common themes of how to make America great again. So that's why I've remained loyal. That's why I've remained astute in my analysis of believing that Donald Trump would be reelected, and the polls and the money certainly reflect that analysis. So I definitely think he's going to win.
A question I always ask you when I see you, George, I think you need to run for Congress. I think you would be great in Congress. You and I are working together to try to help a congressional candidate in South Florida, Johnny Fratto, who's a great guy, challenging Rhino Mario Diaz-Balart, a career politician. But George, would you not this cycle, but if we have elections in 2 years, if we still have a country in 2 years, would you think about running for Congress?
Roger, that's always been a big dream of mine, is to really run and win in Congress. So certainly these years my priority has been helping do my part, whatever little part that is, to get Donald Trump back in office, because I think leadership at the top is going to really set the stage. And then Donald Trump, of course, needs allies. You're right. We're supporting good guys down in South Florida, Johnny Fratto in the 26th district, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if Donald Trump's in office. If he doesn't have the right allies in Congress, he's going to run into the same roadblocks he did during his first term, where he couldn't enact many of his proposals that he wanted, especially at the domestic level. So certainly, if the timing is right, the district is right, and I have endorsements like yours, that's something I would certainly look into and look at it very, very closely.
One of the best things that came out of all of this, George, is that you have a beautiful Italian wife, Simona, who is just a wonderful person. They put her through hell as well. Tell us how she's doing.
Simona is great, and she's been there since the beginning with me. She's an incredible beauty, but more importantly, her heart. She has a heart of gold, and she's the smartest girl I've ever met in my entire life. She's an attorney. She's involved in different endeavors now, and she loves this country. She's a legal immigrant. We've spent years going through the process with her. I think she's gone through the fire in this situation that we've been talking about, especially regarding the lawfare that's targeted her as well. She stood by me. She loves America. She's going to be a citizen very soon, and I wouldn't be surprised to see her do some sort of public service herself once she gets that official citizenship, because I know she's certainly interested too. So you might see the Papadopoulos making a little joint effort in that respect.
I think one of the things people don't recognize in any of these situations is the horrific stress on the wives, on General Flynn's wife, on Paul Manafort's wife, Kathy, on your wife, certainly on my own wife, who I'm happy to say now 3 years cancer-free, having been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer almost immediately after my presidential pardon. All right, I'm afraid we are out of time. I want to thank my good friend George Papadopoulos for joining us today on this special July 4th weekend edition of The Roger Stone Show. And folks, please don't go anywhere, because my good friend Joe Piscopo, a guy who has a heck of a set of pipes himself, will be right along in a minute with Sundays with Sinatra.